In the quiet expanse of Beaumont, Texas, Greg Flanagan was a man of simple habits and solitary evenings. His life on the road had honed a minimalist way of living, and his hotel room at the MCM Elegante Hotel bore witness to this. Greg's nights were spent in solitude, the air conditioner set to a cool breeze as he reclined in his bed, as he indulged in the small pleasures of candy bars and soda while watching the latest action film. This was Greg's world on the evening of Wednesday, September 15th, 2010. Greg's journey had taken him from the vastness of the ocean where he worked as a chief engineer on ships, to the sprawling landscapes of South Texas. Together with his brother Michael, he tapped into the veins of the land, facilitating the extraction of its hidden treasures for oil and gas companies. But that fateful Wednesday night, as the digital chaos of the film's climax filled the room, an unexpected silence fell. Amidst the cacophony of the on-screen explosions, a real and devastating force struck Greg. Without warning, a blow so severe it eclipsed the line between fiction and reality, leaving him to stagger towards the door before succumbing to the force. Greg was dead before his lifeless body fell to the floor of room 348. What followed was a mystery that perplexed and intrigued, a puzzle that beckoned to be solved. I'm Detective Zach Kowalski, a real-life crime scene investigator, and today's question is who or what could have delivered such a fatal blow? The answer to this question would unravel a story so bizarre it could only be believed because it was all too real. Susie Flanagan realized something was wrong when her usual morning call from her husband, Greg, didn't come through. He was unresponsive to phone calls, and his absence from work raised alarms. Concerned, two colleagues visited the hotel only to find no response at the door. With the help of hotel management, they entered the room to discover a distressing scene. Greg was dead on the floor, a cigarette between his fingers. The air in the room was warm and stiff, and there was no evidence of a struggle, and Greg's body showed no signs of obvious trauma. Detective Scott Apple arrived on the scene. A seasoned officer known for his diligence and fitness, he was the kind of cop who never stopped working. Despite his expertise, the scene presented few clues. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle or robbery, and nothing seemed out of place. The neighbors, a group of electricians in town, hadn't heard anything unusual. Detective Apple initially suspected natural causes, given the lack of evidence to suggest otherwise. Dr. Tommy Brown was renowned for his methodical approach to post-mortem exams. His autopsies had been perfected to the precision of an assembly line, meticulously examining bodies, measuring and weighing organs, and recording everything in the official reports. The case of Greg Flanagan seemed ordinary at first. The subject was a middle-aged Caucasian male in relatively good health. Yet upon closer examination, Dr. Brown noted a curious laceration to the scrotum, accompanied by surrounding swelling and discoloration, suggesting a violent impact. As Dr. Brown dived deeper into the autopsy, the narrative of Greg's death took a dramatic turn. The discovery of extensive internal bleeding, damage to organs, broken ribs, and a fatal perforation to the heart led him to the conclusion of a brutal beating or a forceful crush. Dr. Brown declared the manner of death as a homicide. In Beaumont, murders were rare, and Greg's case had been the 10th one for that year, the average. Most were straightforward, solved by interviewing suspects with obvious clues, like a domestic dispute gone wrong or drug deals turned violent. But this case was extraordinary. For someone like Detective Apple, who thrived on cracking tough cases, it presented an exhilarating challenge. However, the difficulty of such a case was exactly that. They were immensely challenging. Despite months of investigation and exploring every conceivable angle, Detective Apple hit a dead end after several months. The physical clues didn't make sense. Unless Greg had been killed elsewhere and his body meticulously returned to the hotel room, the crime scene didn't indicate murder. How could a man sustain injuries severe enough to break ribs and rupture organs without any external signs of trauma, except for a minor bruise and cut? And how could such a violent altercation happen in a hotel room without disturbing anything or anyone hearing it? The motive was also a mystery. Greg had no known enemies. Greg was well liked, a man of integrity and success, making his murder all the more perplexing. Greg was the last person anyone would expect to be murdered, yet here they were. Through the autumn and winter of 2010, Apple pursued every lead. The only clue of note was that Greg had accidentally caused a power outage in his and the adjacent room by microwaving popcorn, an incident he reported to the front desk with some embarrassment. But this seemed a minor detail, and it did nothing to unravel the mystery of his death. Theories surrounding the death abounded, with two main theories driving Detective Apple's investigations. The first pointed towards a sexual assault by the Elegante's maintenance man, a known sex offender, and suggesting that the unusual injuries may have been caused by some sort of bizarre attack. Despite extensive investigation, this theory remained baseless speculation. The second theory shifted focus to a group of union electricians staying next door in room 239. These men, in town for a job, were known to socialize and drink in their rooms. The hypothesis was that the electrical outage might have led to a confrontation with Greg, resulting in a physical altercation outside his room. Further interviews with them weeks after the murder reiterated that the electricians had heard nothing more than coughing from Greg's room, and that they were just as puzzled by the circumstances of the death. Months passed without significant progress. Apple explored every angle, including the possibility of murder for hire by Greg's family or business partner, but found nothing conclusive. By the end of 2010, the case of the body in room 348 remained an unsolved enigma, despite a $50,000 reward. The mystery stood as a testament to the complexities of crime solving, leaving more questions than answers. Enter into the scene former cop and DEA agent turned private investigator, Ken Brennan. When all leads in Greg's case had grown cold and the official investigation seemed to stall, Susie, Greg's wife, was pointed towards Brennan. His reputation as a solver of cold cases is legendary, a beacon of hope for those who are haunted by unanswered questions. He first started on deep background on Greg, getting to understand Greg, his marriage, and his habits. During the interview with Susie, she stated that the only odd thing about the crime scene was that Greg's room had been reported to be warm. She knew that her husband liked to have the cold AC on at night. He then traveled to Beaumont to meet and court Detective Apple. Like two dogs sniffing each other out, a partnership was formed, leading to a fresh perspective on the crime scene. As they dove back into the case file, Apple laid out all the crime scene photos and autopsy findings before Brennan, unraveling the events of the past several months. Brennan listened intently, piecing together the puzzle, and after much analysis, confidently declaring that he believed he knew what had happened. The clue lay in the temperature of the room, a detail that Susie had mentioned about Greg's preference for the cold. Brennan deduced that the air conditioner shut down at the time of the power outage. This pinpointed to Greg's time of death. The hotel log confirmed that the repairman's last visit before the tragedy struck. The discovery of a cigarette between Greg's finger debunked any notion of a violent altercation elsewhere. It was unlikely that an assailant would take the time to place a cigarette back between Greg's fingers. That's an attention to detail that looks great in the drama of movies, but in reality, it's unlikely. The cigarette hinted at a serene moment before sudden chaos. Brennan's theory took shape. Greg, perhaps intending to answer the door and switching the cigarette to his left hand, met his fate in an encounter that left no time for defense. Though hard to digest, Brennan trusted the evidence's direction, no matter how improbable the conclusion seemed. The pieces suggested that Greg suffered his fatal injuries swiftly and within his room, a puzzling scenario that Brennan was determined to unravel. The breakthrough led them to the electricians staying nearby, their room also affected by the power outage. Among all theories, this scenario held water. A drunken confrontation at Greg's door, a few exchanged words, and a tragic end met through kicks. In late May of 2011, several weeks after their initial investigation, Brennan made his way back to Beaumont. This time, he and Detective Apple aimed to speak with some of the co-workers who hadn't been interviewed earlier. He knew well that human nature could not keep secrets forever. If any of the electricians had any information about Greg's mysterious death, it would eventually come to light. Together, they began speaking with the co-workers. The tragedy of the man who passed away at the Elegante Hotel was not unknown among them. It was a story met with sympathy. Yet when pushed for details, the information they provided was nothing more than a tangled web of second-hand and even more distant accounts, muddled and unclear. Among the fragmented stories, Brennan would later recall a significant lead. A crew foreman mentioned a rumor about a gunshot in a boarding house. While Detective Apple had initially disregarded this as a different incident unrelated to their beating, Brennan led the duo back to the scene in search of a bullet. Inside the hotel room, they embarked on a meticulous examination of the surroundings. The floor, the furniture, and the walls received intense scrutiny. On their hands and knees, with flashlights illuminated underneath the furniture, their search initially turned up empty. And then there it was. A curious indention by the door leading to the adjoining room caught his eye. It looked like a simple repair, likely from where the door handle had repeatedly hit the wall. However, a closer inspection revealed a mismatch. The doorknob and the dent didn't align, with the knob making contact slightly to the right. Driven by a hunch, the other side of the wall and the adjacent room was examined. There, Brennan found himself eyeing a small, neatly patched hole in the wall, filled with what was unmistakably dried toothpaste. Measuring its height and the other yielded that they aligned. The toothpaste hole being a little smaller and the hole in Greg's room being slightly larger. Brennan knew what the hole in Greg's room was, the exit of a bullet hole. Further CSI work directed a laser through the holes. The light beam traced a path straight to the bed where Greg had been, lounging with his cigarette, snacks, and movie, unwittingly marked by the trajectory of a bullet. Greg had been shot. Dr. Brown was initially less convinced, sticking to his interpretation of the pathology that Greg had been beaten. But on closer inspection of the wound to the heart pointed out by detectives, he realized his mistake. The bullet's flight path had entered the groin, traveled up through the intestines, and then perforated the right atrium of the heart. With the cause of death confirmed to be a bullet and not a boot kick, Apple and Brennan traveled to Wisconsin to catch up with one of the electricians from the room next door, Tim Steinmetz. Initially, Tim had stuck to the original story provided, of not hearing or seeing anything strange. But when he was confronted about the shooting, the charade collapsed. Tim explained that on the night of the death, he and a few coworkers had been hanging out drinking in the hotel room. During this, one of the electricians, Lance Mueller, began playing with a handgun, pointing it at his coworkers jokingly, but disturbing his cohorts. Then, the gun went off, striking the wall behind the men. Lance panicked, taking the gun out to his car, and then he went to the hotel bar with Tim. Lance would be arrested and charged with Greg's murder. He accepted a plea deal to manslaughter, and on October 29, 2012, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, half of what the law allowed. And while Lance had tried to ignore and believe that Greg had been killed by some sort of initially reported blunt force, he had been worried enough about the gunshot that he had patched the hole and then stashed the gun with an attorney before leaving the state. This narrative serves as a potent cautionary tale regarding how our actions in moments of thoughtlessness can cast long, irreversible shadows on the lives of others. The investigation into the murder, meticulously led by detectives Apple and Brennan, was a testament to the diligent detective work. Like that of a modern-day Holmes novel, Brennan's attuned sense of investigative prowess is a testament to the honed skills of criminal investigations and the powers of deduction. Today's case study was inspired by a great piece in Vanity Fair, and the link to the full story will be in the show notes. If today's investigation captured your interest, show some love to Bonesworth and me by leaving a comment or smashing that like button. It really supports our growing channel. Join the Mystery Squad by subscribing and dive into more fascinating puzzles such as bloodstains in space and how to destroy your fingerprints. Thanks for joining today's exploration. I'm Detective Zach. Bonesworth is behind the camera, and until next time, stay curious.